my still life class. So I'll just go over what I did last week real quick. Last week I just kind of focused on the wood elements of the painting and just wanted to kind of show you guys some different techniques of how to apply paint more than just with a brush, some with a palette knife and stuff like that. So now I'm going to try and bring some of these other elements more to a full render. I don't know if we'll get it completely finished, but I'll take you through my process. So first thing I'll do is oil out, which for this time I'm actually going to add a little bit of oleo gel to my palette, which is a product by Rublev. Let me show you. It's just painting medium. And since this is, I mean, I might work on this a little bit later and stuff, but since it's the last day, I feel comfortable using this to oil out because it's kind of more oily, and since it's the last day, I feel okay with that. And I usually add a little bit of my regular medium with the oleo gel to oil out, because I see a lot of these dark parts are sunken in. Oil this out. Bring out the rich darkness of those shadows. It's not always necessary to oil out the whole painting if you know you're only going to be working on a specific spot. But since I'm going to be kind of jumping around everywhere, I just want everything to be true to color, because if I don't, and I left maybe, let's say, this shadow here matted and didn't oil it out, maybe I would start comparing off of that thinking that it's actually a lighter value, and it could possibly mess up some of my value comparisons. So that's pretty good. Now, just assessing where I want to kind of start this process. I could either start with this tea, or not tea, but this pot thing here, or the egg. Maybe I'll start in here and then see how that goes, and then work my way over here. Yep. This way. So, since I'm going to be going into a bit more tight rendering, I'm just going to get a brush that has more of a point to it, so that I could choose to, if I put down pressure, to put down a lot of paint, or just use the very tip to just put down little tiny shapes of paint. So when I've chosen what I'm going to start working on, which is this pot here, my first thing when I'm just looking back and forth is, you know, where can I get it right first? What's the easiest to me? What can I kind of judge first off? So first thing that jumps out at me is I know that this shadow here touching the shadow on the wood that it's casting, I know that that's the correct value that it's going to stay. So I could probably easily compare it to this shadow value here. So that is where I'll start. So I usually just start if I'm going into shadows by just putting down some transparent oxide red and ultramarine blue. You know, this, make sure I'm going to add a little bit more blue because I'll probably start in the blue area. And then I'll start to bump up the value. I could even take some of this and, you know, sharpen an edge if it got a little cloudy down here. If I just want a really dark mark under here. It's a bit fuzzy right there, just clean some stuff up. Okay. So what I'll do now is maybe I'll just add in some black and some white because I'm thinking that it's a blue in shadow, so it's going to be kind of neutral. It's going to be my neutral blue, so I'm just going to see where white and black gets me. So looking at my palette and looking up there, maybe I want a bit more chroma than that. I'll add some cobalt blue. And first thing I'm going to do is to just put it down right next to the dark there. Now you can see the blue that I'm putting down is a little bit darker than what was there before. But my main thought process right now is how does this value, the blue on the pot, compare to the shadow value here? Just looking, it could possibly go darker, but I think this is a decent place to start, and I could go darker on the edge if I wanted to. I'll start filling in the shadow here. As I get closer to the light, I believe there's some reflected light either bouncing off of this wood here or the white table that's making it a bit brighter here. So I'm going to go higher in value, just add some white, maybe some cobalt blue. Getting a hint of warmth, so I'm just going to touch into my transparent oxide yellow, bringing it almost a bit more green. So now I'm thinking about how it's lighter over to the left, and then it's going to get really dark in my shadow towards the right here. So when I'm putting brush stroke down and then I kind of slow down and stop for a second, I'm just looking at my subject and asking myself where the cast shadow actually stops, because there's kind of these ridges in the pottery and it makes it a bit harder to tell where it stops. I think we could warm up that shadow a little bit. Add some more yellow, transparent oxide yellow. Dipping more into my transparent oxide yellow and a bit into my white just so I can get higher in value as I turn to the left. And when I'm using the term turning, I'm just talking about the form turning from dark into light. So this turn in like kind of gradual gradation from dark to light. So just kind of what you're seeing here is there's a value here, and then there's a value right here that are on the same subject. They look like they're part of the same color, but if I put a dot of this color here over there, it would be a lot brighter. But I'm just kind of blending it in seamlessly, so it's hard to even tell that's happening. But I'm just seeing some reflected light down here. Few spots where there's little indents in the pottery here that I'll assess later. Just trying to pay attention to the drawing. Okay. My next thing is I'll probably just want to, I don't know if I'll have to do too much, but I'm just going to look at the value of this overall tan color in shadow. I can see that it's reflecting some light at the bottom, but it gets darker towards the top in the shadow. So, just looking to try and think how I mixed that color before. I'm going to think raw umber, mostly raw umber and white maybe. Let's try. So this is my oleo gel here. This is my regular medium, which is half linseed oil, half Gamsol, and then here's just a jar of Gamsol here. So when you see me dipping into these things, that's what is what. So it's always trying your best guess on your palette and then asking yourself how to fix it. So I saw this, it was kind of like this yellowish white tan color, off-white tan color. So then I'm thinking, oh, maybe my neutral yellow plus white will make the color. I tried that. It looks a bit too yellow, so maybe it needs to go a bit more neutral, so I'll add some black to it. I almost never get the color right the first time. Well, pretty much never. Very rarely do you get the color right the first time. And it's becoming faster now, but I know definitely when I was, even just a year ago, I would spend, and still now, I spend so much time on my palette trying to mix the right color, putting a color down, adjusting it, and I just won't be satisfied to like fill in a whole area until I've got the color right. Putting this down, then I'm going to check it. So I'm noticing I'm doing a lot of squinting just to see how much lighter that is than this shadow color here. So I think as it travels downward, turns down, that it can get a bit lighter. So I'm just kind of massaging the paint into the paint I already put down so that it fades into it and sort of blends into it. more into my white. I'm going to sharpen. I use a cane a lot as a maul stick, just to steady my hand so I can sharpen this edge. It looks a bit too fuzzy. Just doing some blending. Put that there for now. Okay. Some more shadow color up on this spout thing here. Kind of blends into here from dark into the light. This is my sort of refinement stage. It's going to go a lot slower, especially slower than like my first block-in stage. And it's just the part of the painting that seems the hardest for a lot of people. It's like this finishing stage. How can I make a block-in kind of, I've painted what I've saw, so what, you know, what's the next step? And it just takes slowing down, being present with the object and just kind of tracing your eyes over it, analyzing. It's just subtle shifts, and you'll realize the more you just kind of find these subtle shifts and add them as you find them, the object just starts to come together. So I'm just making it darker along the edge here. I tend to start in my shadows a lot. I think it's because the way I paint is to find the easiest thing first. And for me, it's just easier to find the shadow color. And the shadow value. It's either the shadow, or if something is very, like, plainly a dominant color, like if something is very red, you know, I can think, oh, it's going to be easy for me to just make that red. You know, it's just some cad red and white or something. But most of the times I'm working with a lot of neutrals, and it's just this really ambiguous color that doesn't really make much sense to me until I have some surrounding elements to help me figure out that color. Okay, that's fine enough for now. I'm just gonna dip really quick into my dark, maybe touch a bit of black into it, transparent oxide red. Just put a mark here, because I know that's a dark, and there's a little sliver of a dark in here. Again, more things to just set my value so that I can then compare off of it. Okay, so now I'm going to start turning out of the shadow. So let's get black, cobalt, blue, and let's say some raw umber, because it tends to go towards a greener tint. Add white. And I'm just trying to trying to get this main color here. some of my Naples yellow light. Getting some of my raw umber just for when I travel down into the shadows here. I'm going to clean off my brush because it's pretty contaminated and I'm not able to really push this value up as high as I need to because of all the dark paint I had in there. So I just added some Naples yellow light, just trying to get it higher in value and a bit greener. So let's just test where I am right now. I'm going to test this compared to something I already have here. And I'm noticing it's pretty dark compared to that right there. So it might be a decent value to start turning out of the shadow with. So I'm just looking at this color that's turning right out of the shadow in this blue area. So I'm just adding a bit of cobalt blue because I feel like I see that. Clean off my brush a little. Go lower in value. Okay. So now I'm working in to my kind of half tone, middle tone, you know, where the kind of right on this terminator line where it's going to start turning into the light. I think we need more yellow. So it's a bit dark now, but I'm just finding these darks and then I'll bring the light into it. Just looking at the overall value over here, up the side of this blue area. It's a little bit darker than it was before. Going lighter as I turn to the left, as I'm turning the form from the dark into the light. It's also darker on this bottom part because it's turning under and our light source is from above. More light, turning gradually into that dark. And always when I'm turning the form, it just constantly takes this back and forth. You know, I'll either start too light or I'll start too dark, and then I'll have to just push the light and darks back and forth. Grabbed into some white and then my light blue mixture. Touch of purple. Let's see what value we're at here. Almost at the same value that I had before. So that might be a good place to start. In here. Just slowly turning form. But I'm also thinking about my colors and my values. I was painting earlier today under a different light, and I think right now I'm picking up on how like I'm seeing more of a yellow tint over the still life from this light. Maybe it's because I've been under a different light all day. So I'm tempted to paint this a bit more yellow, but then I'm also thinking that if I made this background color, this tint of like blue-gray, and this one like this, that maybe it's going to be more blue and less yellow. So I bring that up because it's more of, I'm thinking about my comparison relationships to what's in my painting rather than just copying exactly what I see. Whereas if this is slightly less of a yellow blue than what I see up there, it's because everything else is on my canvas is slightly less yellow than what I'm seeing. And plus, after a while, maybe my eyes will kind of calibrate to this and I'll just see more true colors of it. So another thing I'm doing is I'm also kind of thinking about a term called big form modeling. So I'm looking at this thing and there's a bunch of little different kind of marks in it and different local color shifts and stuff. But I'm thinking about turning the big form, without thinking about any of that stuff, trying to get that right, and then I can go in and just make little adjustments. So I'm just modeling the big form, and then I can go in and find all the little subtle changes and stuff like that. So I'm always just thinking about where the light source is coming from. It's coming from above left, so up and left, not directly from the left and not directly from above. So I'm just thinking, if it's turning down, it's getting darker. If it's turning right, it's getting darker. If it's turning up, it's getting lighter. If it's turning to the left, it's getting lighter. So I'm just always keeping that in mind. So right now I'm painting this part right here. It's to the right, and now I'm turning to the left, and I'm thinking it has to be getting brighter as I'm turning this way. And understanding form and light was such a huge kind of light bulb moment, like big development moment in my, my career as a student. And just once I understood it, or at least understood the concept, because you understand the concept before you can actually do it. Once it made sense, then you know, I tried to pull it off every time I painted something. I was thinking about the form, thinking about the light direction, and then, you know, just getting better and better at it. And my paintings just started to look so much more solid and three-dimensional after really trying to implement that in everything. Because if there's anything that I realize in old master paintings is that every object just looks so solid, like set in space. Everything okay? Everything all right? Okay. So I'm just gonna be turning the form on this stuff a little bit more. Then I might, before I really continue to keep going on it, then I might just tie up some loose ends all on the edges. Because a lot of times, a good tip that I've figured out just from painting is that there's a lot of times where things look really unfinished and you don't know what to do to kind of finish them off. So you'll be messing around on the insides of things forever and just moving stuff around, and it still doesn't have that finished quality in our minds, like what we think finished looks like. And usually, a lot of times it can just be the outside edges of something. Just like sharpening up the outside edges and making it all feel like a solid thing, a lot of times is all it needs. Obviously this needs a little bit more, but you know, getting that outside edge is a very important part, which I'll talk about more once I decide to go there. Kind of drag my brush over because there's some of these ridges in here. Maybe go from the shadow. The way I paint a lot of the time is I'll try something out subtle. Like I'll try out some of these shapes very subtly, you know, try and get them right, and then once I feel like it's okay, then I can jump in with a dark shape, dark piece of paint once I've kind of tried something out more subtly. So, just like when I go into these little ridges down here, I might do them like a lot lighter than they actually will end up being, just to see if I'm going in the right direction before I commit to a really dark piece of paint. Just looking back and forth, my values. I'm squinting at it, noticing that like right under this highlight, right here, it's very, very bright, and then it just kind of chops down into darkness. But it's hard to tell if that's just because of the ridge there or if it's actually turning that deeply. And I think it's just because the ridge, like indent on here, is giving it that illusion. But so maybe I'll try and put that a little bit. And I'm getting this color just by going further down on my scale here. So I've just mixed an arrangement of blue from dark to light, and then I'm just dipping into it where I need the value. So now I'm dipping into my higher value. My darker value, seeing another one of these ridges here. Let me try and turn out of one a little bit more. And it's a back and forth until I get it right. Noticing it, maybe it's a little bit too bright right here. Go into my high value blue. Turn from that into the dark. See if that checks out. Let's make some higher value blue. I'm always grabbing a good amount of paint. Maybe we can get a little bit brighter on the left top side of the blue. Blend into the dark that I have. Get a little bit darker here. Let's see. I'm going to even make this shadow under here go lighter at the left and then turn darker. Okay, I'm seeing this kind of rusty orange color underneath here. I might go ahead and put some of that in. And it might help connect that to this bottom part here and some of the reds in here. So let's see. Let me grab some of my burnt umber. And add some yellow, my lemon yellow. Some transparent oxide red. I'm going to start in the shadow to see if that value works. It's looking a little too or not chromatic enough, so I'm going to add some cat orange to it. Add more cat orange, some lemon yellow. As I turn left, because it's going to get a little bit brighter. Now, as it gets brighter, I'm not exactly sure what kind of color that is. So first thing I'm going to try and do is just get a right value. So I just added some yellow. You know, I know it still needs to be orange, so I'm not going to go ahead and bump up the value with white or my light blue, but just grabbing some yellow to get me somewhere to start. Then I'm going to put that color down. And look, there's actually some of this yellow color there I can see, more on the edges, sort of lightly blending that into the blue. Then go back in with a darker color. Maybe add some red. Go darker on my string. Maybe add some transparent oxide red to bump up the chroma as I go darker. Just noticing a darker, more chromatic color in the middle of this sort of light yellow color. Then I actually see blue pop through again down here underneath it. And the blue gets darker as it turns to the right. Now I'm just seeing some yellow edges like all around this orange color, but I'm not going to go into my light yellow because that wouldn't make sense because it's now in the shadow, whereas this is more facing towards the light on this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a dark yellow. Right now I'm going to start with my raw umber. Maybe add a little bit of lemon yellow to it. I'm going to try that. A little too dark, I can go higher, so I'm going to add a little bit more lemon yellow. It's getting close, you could probably go a little bit lighter. That's looking better. I'm just kind of hatching it in to that shadow color so it feels kind of more seamless with it and not just a blob of paint. Adding some more yellow in here. Just going to make sure I'm going higher in value as it turns left. Now I'm thinking about these ridges here. It's something I'm going to go back and forth on a lot. Yeah, so I'm going to do some questions.
Great, so the first question is from Simon Watkins. I'd love to hear a bit more about your lighting. Do you have a separate light on the subject and on the panel, or do you light them both with one light?
So for this instance, which is not how I typically work, this is more to help out the live stream circumstance because we're doing it at night, but it's also working very well. We have one light that is on the still life, and then we have a separate light on the palette and canvas, and then we have kind of a board on this kind of tripod thing that's blocking the light that's on my canvas from hitting the still life setup. But how I usually work when I'm doing most of the still lifes that you see on my website or Instagram, whatever, is all from a north light window, which I'm using the same window to light the canvas as I am to light my subject. So yeah, good question.
Simon also asks, hi Alex, really enjoying the demo. I'd be interested to hear how your still life methods compare to your approach to figurative paintings. Do you still use paint in the same way, with the first layers being a little lighter and warmer than later layers? And do you still work mainly from life?
That's a good question too. So it's pretty much exactly the same. I mean, every component could vary depending on what it is, but for the most part, it's painting lighter and then painting darker on top, the same amount of texture depending on what it is. And with my still lifes, I'm working strictly from life. With my figures, if I'm doing something bigger, something that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of model time, I'll have the model for a short amount of time to do a small color study from life, spend a decent amount of time on that, to just not thinking about drawing too much, just trying to really get the colors and values accurate, so then I can use that on my bigger painting that I'll then use from, sketches and stuff I did from life, and then also photo reference. But I also do work from life on my figure paintings when I have the time to do it. Or if it's a smaller painting, I can do most of it from life, and yeah.
Last question is from Sarah Brown. How important have you found the study of the old masters, seeing works in the flesh, and have elements filtered into your own technique?
So that, I think that for me personally, that has helped so much, looking at old master paintings and actually trying to understand what they were doing. You can get to a certain level of painting without that, I think, by just learning from contemporary, living painters. But I think if there's this kind of next level you want to get to, this next level that the master painter that you love has gotten to, that you're wondering, why none of your favorite painters that are alive are getting there. I think to start figuring those things out, it's very important. But you can still get to a good level of painting without that. But for my process, I find it very important. And it's more of me trying to, when I was first starting out, I was looking at a lot of contemporary painters to learn, their techniques and stuff. And of course it's great because you can find videos and all stuff like that. And now as I'm getting older and trying to mature my technique, I'm looking more to the old master paintings. So, some great questions, guys. Thank you. Just softening this a little bit. So I just want to take a second and look at my painting, see where I think I should go next. I mean, there's just so much information down here that I know that if this was a painting that I had all day to work on, all day the next day to work on, I could probably spend a good amount of time at this bottom portion here. There's a lot of kind of mysterious stuff going on that's not so clear cut. But for the sake of the live stream, I'll move on soon. There is this part in here where I kind of lost where the shadow stops and starts. Just gonna get that. Fade this in. Okay. Now, before I get to the outside, I'll address this part right here. Because there's also things where I'll look at it and I'll say, I don't know if I can move on until that part is just a little bit more settled than that. So I'm going to go into my shadow colors here for that. Fix up the drawing of this shape slightly. Then I need to start mixing into the light. Get rid of some of this blue that's in my way. So my palette starts to become organized in a way of like, I'll have my string of dark to light of this blue color. Right here is going to be my tan whitish color. And as I move on, I'll find room for different strings all on my palette. But I'm never just making little piles of different colors. Everything relates to, its object or local color. So it's like, here's the blue section, here's the tan section. It's not me just trying to figure out one little half centimeter of a color in that tan section and mix it, somewhere random on my palette. It all stays together and organized. Just checking what value I'm at. Could possibly go warmer. Go a little bit into my raw sienna, Naples yellow light. I have some black in my palette here, and I'm going to try and mix a really light color, so I'm going to scrape that off. Because I'm looking at this spout here in comparison to everything around it. It is quite brighter than everything else around it. So I'm going to grab a lot of my Naples yellow light. I'm looking at what color that would be. Let's just mix into my pile. I think my color can get even more chromatic. So actually I'm going to add some transparent oxide yellow. Into my light mixture. Maybe a touch of cad orange. I think I need to go even brighter. Just looking and comparing. I think we're definitely bright enough. I think what's throwing me off is there's a highlight on the spout that's making me think the whole thing is a lot brighter, when really it probably has a lot to do with that highlight being right on there. So now I'm just gonna try and turn the form. I know this is turning up facing towards the light, but then it's starting to curve away from it. And this is round, so it's going to get darker on the edges as it turns away. Going darker on my string. Darker on my string to turn out of this shadow. I'm also thinking as it gets to the very edge, the terminator where the light meets the shadow, it gets kind of this more neutral color, so I went more into my raw umber, just kind of my neutral yellow. I think you could get even more neutral and dip into a blue, or I guess I could say to make it more neutral, the raw umber was looking a bit too warm, so I went into a blue to cool it down, therefore making it more neutral. I could have added black, but I didn't want it to darken my mixture too much. If anything, I wanted it a little bit lighter. So I went into my light blue. Trying to pay attention to where this darker shadowy shape here is. You know, where it turns and right before it turns up. Get my cane. Using just the very tip of my brush to get some more accurate, shape handling. Just gonna turn this form subtly. Just seeing some blues in these middle tones. So I touched into my blue mixture and added it to my tannish beige color mixture. Just thinking it's going to turn up lighter. And there's a darker part that's a bit more chromatic. It's hard to get my hand over in this area without the cane. It gets darker, more chromatic back here. It's looking better. Now I'm going to try and just remake that shadow color that we see right here so I can get the shape right, because I've kind of painted over the shape a bit. Just looking back and forth on my drawing. Just keep going back and forth, trying to get that form to turn right. Going darker. Going from dark to slightly lighter. I think as it goes up right in here, it's turning up, which is kind of turning that section slightly away from the light, so it's a bit darker. Now I'm going to turn the form out of this little spigot thing here, because I kind of just have a hard shadow. Just blending into the wet paint that was already there, out of that shadow. Just kind of leaning back to really try and take in the picture. I think that this light here travels up higher. Just flicking my eyes back and forth without even moving my head to see what differences jump out at me. Seems to be brighter in this area. Grabbing into some raw umber to get into this darker part. Maybe I go into my blue a little. Fix this shape a little bit. Maybe it can get darker in here where it turns and stops before it turns back up. And that will then make this appear brighter. You know, sometimes I'm not exactly sure what the problem is, but I'm just going to keep kind of troubleshooting in my head what could be the answer and then trying it and just going back and forth. I'm kind of delicately using my brush so it's blending into the paint that's there. I'm going to go up my scale, my value scale, so that I can turn out of this shadow. So it's starting to look a little better. Now I see some areas in here that have some blue popping through. fix this shape a little bit while also kind of blending into the paint that I just put there. See some of the... So here's the thing that I'm thinking about. So the form is turning on this blue part, and I see like maybe there's a few little dots in this lighter color where blue shows through. I'm not going to go and grab into my light blue and put it there. I'm going to go into my dark blue, which is the same value as this, and then I could possibly even go darker than that because it's still continuing to turn. So I'm going to test this value. Let's see, I'm going to put one, just a little mark. Just to show that some blue is showing through. Maybe the blue decided to, you know, travel through right there. Just little things that show some interesting aspects. Now I can do the same thing with my tan yellow color. I'm going to be thinking about, it's really the key of, you know, putting, so like in this blue there's all these little speckles of the tan color showing through. And to put those in without them just looking like flat pieces of different colored paint on top of there is the key to doing that, is just making sure that the value is correct in relation to the light and form of it. So like I can go high in my yellow, my light yellow kind of tan mixture. If I go into my lighter areas on the pot here, and then travel down as I start to turn. As I'm turning, I'm kind of releasing the pressure of my brush a little bit, so that it starts to just blend with the paint underneath. You know, if I had all the time in the world, and maybe if I go back to this after the live stream, I could really just get into those details in here, but because I think that's just what's really going to make this part of the still life interesting. Go even brighter. Just go over some of these parts that I haven't really had the chance to paint yet. I'm seeing this little top part, the top part of it that's facing up. Seems like it has a bit of blue in it, so I'm just carrying over my tan mixture into my blue mixture. Pretty light in value right there. Going darker in value. Now I'm noticing how dark this can go. Because I have this stuff there to compare it, which I'm going to continue to even make darker. Seeing little hints of this orange color. In there. Okay, just thinking if the light is coming from the left, then this side has to be brighter, and it's kind of, as it turns and get closer to the shadow, it gets a little bit darker, but a lot of it's on the same field on this top lid part here. Seeing that there's kind of a part around the lid here where light starts to catch more as it's turning. So there's a lip here that's light's coming in and casting a shadow, and then as it's turning to the right, it's getting lighter. Just want to fix the drawing on that. Just going into my light yellow mixture here, just so the lip to the left of it is catching light. Get some of my blue. Travel down in my blue value so that it makes sense to the light here. this dark line here is not that dark. The shape of this is a bit off. I'm just going to fix some drawing. Some little pieces of blue in here. Some darker pattern on here. Whenever it's not a solid color and has kind of decoration on it, always messes up the form a little bit, or at least the way I think about form, because it's not just one solid color that's turning. So I have to make sure when I put something down that it still makes sense. Okay, let's mix a light orange color. Just a little bit of orange on this lip here. Travel down in value before I put an orange mark on the shadow side. Some brighter little lip here where it turns up. I'm just going to try and suggest some of this stuff here. That I can then later go in and put more detail into if I want. Just going into a darker shadow color so that the lip has a bit of shadow. Little dark accent for where this shadow is. Before it was just the background color. Let's see. I'm imagining this, the top of this lid traveling around. Maybe a little dark accent right here, where that kind of turns in. So now I'm seeing on the pot here, it's a little fuzzy. So to clean up this edge here, I'm seeing it's pretty dark right there. Then I'm going to blend it out. Maybe I can go a little darker on this shadow color there. Separate it from the background. This edge is looking a little too sharp. Just taking the little like soft edges of my brush and wisping it back and forth there. Just adding a little bit more dark. Let's move on to this handle section here. So just looking at it, thinking where's my easiest place to start. Could just redraw in that shadow area because I have it a bit vague. It's looking like a warm, maybe it's the warm end of this kind of yellow beige string. So I got some transparent red oxide. Gonna grab some raw umber. Maybe if that's too red, I'll grab a little bit of cobalt blue. Drawing this in here, and then as it turns, it gets a little bit lighter. So I'm just adding my lemon yellow to make it lighter. It's definitely going to be some drawing, fixing. So now I'm going to think about this color here on the top part of that handle, which is lighter, so I'm going to travel up on my string. It's more neutral, so I'm going to grab some raw umber, maybe a touch of black. Just gonna try and work on the drawing a little bit. Now I'm gonna need need some of that background blue color to fix the drawing. Before I go there, maybe I'll just get some more value right. So this is turning in here, just makes it a little bit darker. It's kind of a little indent in there. Drawing's off, but I'll fix that in a second. Some lighter value. Fix that drawing, so I'm just going to grab a different brush. It's going to be a pretty small shape in there, so I'm going to get a smaller brush. Mix up that color. I can go just darker in my blue mixture. Some black. And white. And probably some burnt umber, just because it's tending to go a bit more to a purple side of the black-blue family, so black plus my burnt umber is kind of my neutral blue, my neutral red. Try that. And that's pretty close. Just run over and scratch out. If it was something really soft, maybe I would just repaint the color I went into, but since it is a piece of wood under here, this scraping might actually help give that effect. It's an odd shaped handle. If I had more time, maybe I'd probably spend a really good amount of time just getting the drawing of it right. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time, but don't want to waste all of our time on drawing it. Look at some little spots on it that have bits of blue coming up. These little ridges are pretty blue. Add some color down in there. There's some lighter yellow color in here as this kind of turns down. Then there's this highlight right on the edge here. Just finding little variations in the color. Gets more so in the value, it just gets a little bit brighter there as it turns up. Just looking at the drawing of this handle. Just thinking how I'd really like to spend more time on it, but move on for now. This edge got a bit lost. Let me get some more light yellow. Looking back, the lips here feels a little off. Push this out a bit more. Adding some more blue into there. Trying to also make that part feel like it's kind of cutting in. Coming back to sharpen that edge. one more little spot. This maybe curves in a bit too much. Fix that edge. Now I'm just gonna continue to fix up the edges a little bit. And then I'll move on to the egg and paper area. I just want to sharpen this. Get some lighter blue and sharpen that up. Maybe that was a little too light. Go a little bit darker as it turns down. And then for down here, I will get darker orange to separate this. From the background. Just the slightest little dark line down here. Then see a little dark mark down here. Okay. So, just keep finding little tiny adjustments. See a dark orange kind of line here that's going to help separate, bring this little lip forward and then the top back. All right.
So the first question is from Sarah Brown. Hi Alex, do you ever work up textured passages using tools other than a palette knife or brush?
Work up textured passages? No, I pretty much am just using my brush or palette knife. The only other tool I ever really use sometimes will be sandpaper, but that's more to knock things down rather than build them up. Sometimes if I'm trying to build up a big chunky part and I want it to dry quickly so I can paint on top of it, I'll use this liquid impasto medium that will help dry it faster, but that's about it.
Mustafa Mahmood asks, could you explain the difference between scumbling and dry brushing and glazing and veiling, or are they similar?
Scumbling, dry brushing, and
Glazing and veltura, which means veiling.
So I'm not exactly sure what veltura or veiling means, but the difference between scumbling and dry brushing would be, you know, just trying to think. Scumbling, I still have a lot of paint on my brush, and the brush is really well loaded. I have a lot of paint on it, really good amount, and I'm just kind of scrubbing it on, like how I applied all of this. And it looks like a scumble because it's not a solid passage of paint. You know, it's kind of, you know, scrubbed on there, so some of the paint is being lifted up, some is getting put down. A dry brush, I would say, is if I took a dry brush and I went into some paint just lightly, and then kind of, let me just grab some. If I just took some, and then I was kind of just getting this kind of cloudy passage of paint where I don't have enough paint on my brush to leave this kind of mark, but I have less, so it leaves it more of this cloudy feeling to it. That's all I would say. And the other word I'm not as familiar with. But when I talk about glazing, I'm usually just talking about the paint that I'm using has more medium, so it's more liquidy and thin, and I'm glazing over another part of my painting. So let's say I just wanted to make this whole painting, you know, a little bit colder and darker. If I just like took a really, like a lot of medium, you know, and then added black to it so that it was really thin, but a lot of medium, almost like watercolor, and just went over it, that would be more glazing. So yeah.
Another one from Mustafa. Why is burnt umber a neutral red while transparent oxide red is a neutral orange, not red? I feel it's neutral red. And when we add ultramarine blue to burnt umber, which is a neutral red, they mute each other and become black. Maybe I am mistaken.
So my transparent oxide red, I'm not thinking about as neutral whatsoever. If anything, my transparent oxide red is one of my most chromatic colors. So when I'm trying to make a really rich dark color, I'm taking my transparent oxide red, which is my very deep, rich, what I, in my mind, just think of as orange, and mixing it with my really dark, deep, rich, chromatic blue to make this really nice, rich, dark color. But whereas in burnt umber, it's kind of matte, it's much more neutral, and my transparent oxide red is just this rich orangey color, almost like a, it's this nice has this nice transparency to it as well, almost like a jewel or something. So transparent oxide red I'm thinking about as chromatic, and my burnt umber I'm thinking about as neutral. Okay. So I'm just gonna look back. A few spots I could scratch in here. Just scratching out some areas of the paint on these wooden parts just to give some sharp edges and to show some part where maybe some raw wood is showing through. Okay. So I had a big chunky piece of paint here, and I just scratched it off just to see what effect it would give me. Maybe it would give more of a random effect. So I'm gonna switch over to the egg now, but I'm gonna have to get a new brush that's smaller and relatively not beaten up so that the tip still has a fine tip on it. I kind of scumble and scrub my brushes a lot, so they end up getting a little messed up. Let me see. Can use this little tiny one since it's a very small object. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna put some more white out on my palette. I'm gonna get some pure white first. I'm gonna go ahead and put some pure white down on here. Some on this side while sharpening some of the edges. Okay. Grab some white. I'm actually going to put a touch of yellow into it. Just finding some variation. And then I'm gonna start turning into the shadow. Clean this off real quick. My white, and then I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it. As we turn down into the shadow. touch of purple. I'm going to go ahead and mix more of this color with a bigger brush. It's just harder for me to get these color mixtures with this tiny little brush. So I'm going to grab some white, medium, some raw umber for my darker areas, some black. Build up into the white. I'm going into this, right up next to the shadow. And I'm just subtly turning to the light. It's also darker towards the back here because this is casting a bit of a shadow onto it. Bit more raw umber to get a warmer color. Just think as this turns back, I'm gonna mix shadow color, get a little bit more raw umber down here. Go into my white. See what value we're at. Could possibly go a little bit lighter. Maybe more yellow. Switching brushes to a little bit smaller brush. There's this tiny little shape in here. Grabbing a tiniest touch of black to neutralize it a little bit. I'm using a lot of paint on the brush to try and sharpen these edges. And since the brush is well loaded, it'll leave just a solid mark of paint so that it's easier to achieve a sharp edge. Whereas if I didn't have much paint onto my brush, it would give more of a dry brushing effect, which would leave a fuzzy edge. We're going to go higher in value. As we get to this, to the right side of the shadow, nice chunk of white down there. As this curls around, catching some light. Just trying to look at all the subtle value shifts in this shadow here. See where it starts getting a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, to try and create a nice kind of glowing atmosphere from the inside. Just looking at it, looking at the value inside the egg compared to other values. Go probably a little bit darker towards the bottom left. Start dark and fade into the light that I had. If I fade it kind of seamlessly enough, you won't really be able to tell that I went too much darker. Okay. Now I'm going to try and find a bluish transition color where this shadow meets the light. I'm lightly kind of wisping my brush back and forth as I apply the paint so that it's both going into the shadow and mixing into the shadow and into the light at the same time. Just to create this soft blended edge. See that shadow is a bit darker towards the bottom. Just paying attention to how it's subtly darker towards the bottom before it gets lighter up top. Adding a bit more blue on this transition color. Just such a subtle, soft shadow, so I just really want to try and capture that feeling. Go back into my shadow color. Shadow color kind of peaks up a little bit. And there. A little bit darker up top as well. Getting some more pure white. this edge here where it meets the shadow, it's a bit softer, more kind of a lost edge. Once I go into that shadow color, I can make it even softer. Okay, so I want to really find the true kind of terminator on this egg, right where the shadow really starts. See, it's kind of dark at the bottom and then fades as it goes up. So again, I'm just kind of taking you through my process on how I would go about this. You know, you saw the first couple of days where it was kind of slow blocking stuff in, and then I really sort of let things build up. I'm just slowly building things up. You know, I'd go another layer on this, I'd keep going on this egg, and I'd just keep bringing separate parts of it up slowly. But there's at no point where I'll be doing anything that's much different or any different than what you're seeing me do. So I just wanted to just show you my actual process. There's nothing different that I would do in the future that I'm not showing you on this live stream. It's just more and more slow, building up until I get to the place that I want. So I'm just slowly, subtly turning this form here. Grabbing some more white, go into here a bit more. Just a constant back and forth. few little pieces of white over there. Before I go too much further, there's a few little cool spots where there's like some nails sticking up and stuff. Maybe I just want to suggest that slightly before I move on. Oop, let's drop my brush. So there's a part sticking out of here. Then it turns into kind of like this brown rust color. Let's try burnt umber, some yellow to make it brighter, then add a touch of red to it. Some Naples yellow light. Just little subtleties. Not that easy to notice, but just little subtle shifts in value to suggest a nail coming through there. Two nails sticking up out of here. Just trying to see where on here. About here. And there's another one right next to it, slightly tilted. They're both giving off cast shadows. And I would blend into those a little bit. Just getting some light. There's some blue on there. Maybe I'll even add in some warmer, sort of rusty looking parts. Just trying to load up my brush so I can bring it to a point. Kind of soften these cast shadows, make them feel a bit more natural. Again, all stuff that I would spend a lot more time on, but I'm sort of just blocking them in because there were some really cool elements to the still life that I liked originally when setting it up. Just went into some transparent oxide red into my kind of neutral orange over here. Transparent oxide red. Just putting little shadows underneath these lines. Little heads to the nails. Just quickly suggest these. Few brush strokes, tying in some of this reddish orange color in a few places. You know, we have a little bit here, we have some showing through in here, we have it down here, and now we have it in here. Just adding to the overall color harmony of the piece. This kind of play on neutral blues and neutral oranges. Okay. A few of those nails I would probably, some of them I might have taken out if I could keep going, some maybe just clean up a little bit. I really like that one. These are kind of cool. Maybe these are looking a bit too repetitive. So maybe I'd fix that. But for now, it's all right. A little piece of wood sticking out there. Okay. Cleaning off this brush a little bit. I'm going to start cleaning up this shadow a little bit here so that I can then compare this paper off of it. I will start over here. Start with some transparent oxide red ultramarine blue. Let's get into some cobalt blue. Start filling in this shadow a little bit. Let's see. It's a little bit cooler than what was there before, which is good. And some of that warmth is showing through. And then as it gets to this very edge, it gets darker. So I'm kind of running out a bit of space. I'm just going to mix a really dark, rich dark over here real quick. Maybe add a little bit of black to it. Fading the color I had before that I just put down into that. I think that the shadow could get even lighter as it gets over here. I'm going to travel up on my scale. Just going to start to now transfer from shadow into the light. Further softening the edge of this egg with the background shadow color that is there. Looking back and forth, I think I could possibly go a little bit dark in the shadow of the egg, but maybe it's something that I would build up, let dry, maybe scumble on a darker layer, just comparing it to what's around it. Because I like the idea of the effect of it being a little bit lighter, so it looks like light is passing through this very thin egg into the shadow of it. But so I'm going to leave it there for now and see if it gives off that illusion. If not, we'll have to make it a little bit darker. Some travel down on my value scale while also adding some cobalt blue just to get this in-between shadow and light color. What time is it?
It's 8:34.
8:30. So it's about 10 minutes till another round of questions, I believe, or at least questions soon. So if you have any questions, and if I know there was something mentioned about comparing glazing to another method. If there's some way to kind of come across with that a little bit clearer with the word, maybe there's a different word for it, and so that maybe I can help you out a little bit better on that. Because they could mean the same, it could mean the same thing as glazing. I know that for a while, and still really, all these different variations of what people call a glaze, and some people who glaze are actually doing something else than what other people would call glazing. So it's all very, you know, it's to each his own, and it's hard. I'm pretty sure in, I don't know if it's Italian, but the word for glazing and scumbling is actually the same exact word. So a lot of texts that have been translated could be slightly wrong. Anyway, let's see, I'm gonna just trying to see a general overall color of this paper. It's a bit warm, so it kind of goes up into the yellows. Maybe I'll even go up into my yellow mixture here. Just looking, different variations in the paper. Starts to tilt up a little bit over here. Catching some more light this way. Just put that back here for now. So I'm going to go ahead with the shadow underneath this piece of paper, which has a nice golden color to it. Into some transparent oxide red, some transparent oxide yellow. Now with this pretty chromatic yellow, I'm just drawing out this shadow. Now if it comes across as slightly too chromatic, that's when I'm ready to go a little bit further, maybe where the shadow touches the paper, I'd find more of a neutral transition color. And then that makes you see it as less chromatic, but still keeping the effect of that chromatic color. Clean off my brush a little bit. A little bit of reflected light. Some light bouncing. I believe the light is kind of coming down, bouncing off the light or off the paper and hitting underneath the paper, which is then bouncing even more light onto the paper underneath it. So it's giving this kind of glow, this glow effect right at the edge of the paper. With this paper, I'm still, at this stage in it, it's still more of just a blocking of the paper. And the way I work with paper is definitely just different or multiple layers of scumbling on top of each other to find little nuances. Because I like the look of the scumble on top of white, showing a little bit of what was underneath. So maybe if I went really yellow on a piece of paper the first time, then on top of that I could scumble some, cooler, more neutral colors. And it would give this really cool, just like vibrating effect of the different whites. So right now I'm going to just try and get some values more correct on the shadows. Gets a good bit darker here. Go higher in value for just a little small shadow. Grab some darker value. So there's another piece of paper coming through here. that I already drew the shadow in for, so now to just catch the edge light of it. Drawing this line here. And that tells me I can go a little bit darker on the actual paper. Perspective is a little bit off. This paper back here is colder, and I could probably make it a little bit darker than what I had before. And that's going to be casting a little shadow. Then you'll find little spots where the paper just turns up, faces more towards the light, ever so slightly. Like here. Getting a little fuzzy. I'm going to sharpen that up a little bit. Yeah, we can take some questions.
So the first question is from Mustafa Mahmood. Could you explain the reasons of muddy colour, how to avoid it, and is it related also to student grade paints, or it doesn't matter?
So I think that student grade paints absolutely, push your paints to muddy. There's been times when I've been teaching like a class in person and I've tried to mix the color on the student's palette with their paint, dabbing into the same colors that I would, and I just can't make the color, and it just makes this kind of like muddy color. So there is that. And then also I would say that in terms of muddy color, it's usually not so much about the exact color you're making as muddy, because all of these colors I'm mixing in like these neutral shadow, like warm muddy blues, stuff like that could look muddy, but I think what makes a painting look very muddy is that if your lights are painted warm and then your shadows are also warm and there's no variation of cools in there, it tends to be a bit muddy. And that can happen because a lot of times, like in skin tones, there can be a light, and maybe it's a cool light, maybe it's natural light on a person, and the shadow seems pretty warm, so we paint the shadow warm. But then the person also has a warm skin complexion, or we imagine skin as warm, so he mixed this kind of like yellowy red color that's very warm and put it there, and then you have this warm color with warm shadow, and it just tends to look muddy. And what it is it's just lacking that cool color component to kind of set it off. I've had plenty of times where I've had skin tones just to look a bit muddy or chalky or like Barbie doll looking, and it's mostly because I just haven't added that kind of neutral, cool middle tone coming out of the shadows yet. So yeah.
Sarah Brown says, thank you for an amazing workshop. Really enjoyed watching you render all the beautiful subtleties. Have learned a great deal. Your explanation of your process has been fantastic. Thanks again, Sarah.
Oh, thanks so much, Sarah. That's awesome.
Mustafa says, sorry, scumbling is confusing and I found many definitions. Is it broken layer patches of color that show through, like what you did in the background, or thick opaque or semi-opaque layer of paint to give a softer effect, regardless of patchy or showing through?
I would say it was the first thing that you said, which is how I painted the background, which is a semi-opaque paint, because there's some parts where it's like showing through and there's some parts where it's fully opaque. So I would say that's at least the way I use it. When I'm using the word scumbled, that's what I'm talking about. Other people might be talking about something slightly different, but yeah.
Mustafa also says veltura, Italian word I read before, means veil, kind of vague term. It's a glaze with a color which is lighter in value than the underlayer and is semi-transparent. More simply put, it has white in it. This will cool off the color. It's a bit like a mix between a scumble and a glaze.
Yeah, I think that sounds exactly right. Because if you would glaze with a scumbling color, which, you know, like tends to have some white in it, but you're glazing, it's more of like this milky white or just milky glaze over something, that would definitely tend to cool it down. But it's definitely different from a scumble, because a scumble has more paint. That sounds like it is a glaze, but with a opaque color, rather than using like a more transparent color, like transparent oxide yellow, and then glazing with that. So, yeah.
And finally, Mustafa says, thank you so much for the workshop. You're a must-recommend workhorse, talented and knowledge bank. It was a great time.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's so nice. And I look forward to doing it again. Maybe I'll choose some different variation in subject matter. If you guys ever, next time I am teaching one of these still life classes, if you sign up, I usually don't decide what I'm painting until like right up to it. I'm always just kind of messing with different stuff, so if you ever have a suggestion, let me know. And thanks again for all your kind words. That's really nice. I'm gonna keep going. Maybe I could fix up this edge here a little bit. So I'm just kind of softening this edge here. Give a bit more atmosphere. with my dark to make that a little less fuzzy. I'm basically gonna take this darker white and fade it down into the lighter white so that it kind of falls back into space. Softening this a bit. I feel like that helped let that fall back a little bit. Maybe it needs a few more. It's a little warm right here. Maybe a few cool colors in there. Just looking, thinking if I had to call it done, where would be my last choices? This line here, I think, is a little too ambiguous. Maybe I would fix that up a little bit. I can see right underneath here, I can carry through with a dark line. Okay, right here is definitely a spot I probably want to fix up real quick. Just gonna soften this shadow out. Some transparent oxide red. Maybe some yellow. I'm just filling in the shadow. It's definitely an area of the painting that needed one last kind of pass. Blend that shadow in a bit. Let's go into this blue. It's looking a little too short. Maybe I'll go slightly darker in here. Slight glow on the edge, the shadows here. There's an interesting looking nail over here. It's a little bit farther off, but let's try and suggest this real quick, and if I don't like it, I'll scrape it out. First, let me put in its cast shadow. Get kind of a high value neutral brown. Move over to the right. You can see it a little better. So just a little nail that had some character hiding over there in the corner. Looking. This shadow doesn't quite follow through. Add a little bit more shadow here.
3 minutes over, so.
Okay. So that's it. Thank you guys for joining, and I didn't bring it to a completion, but if you just take all the steps that I was doing and just kept going with them, that's how I would eventually arrive at a finish. So thank you guys so much and hope to see you next time.